Hi there. Welcome to my kitchen here on this Thursday evening. Today is December 26th, 2024, and we are here, or I'm here, to celebrate a little milestone or an anniversary in the history of my little cast iron hobby here. I suppose you could call it cast ironitis to actually think that I'm celebrating the anniversary of one of my cast iron pans. But that is exactly the case here, and that's because this is quite a special pan as well as a special occasion here, because this is in fact the 10th anniversary of receiving as a Christmas gift in 2014 this Finex cast iron skillet. This was a very special gift from a good friend of mine, namely Jeffrey Rogers, the culinary fanatic. And at that time, he sent this to me completely unexpected. And believe you me, I was entirely shocked to open this and discover what he had sent in his generosity. So this is certainly something I have never forgotten. And that's why I am very proud to be celebrating the 10th anniversary of that Christmas by doing the same dish in this Finex skillet that I made to christen this 10 years ago. And boy, have things changed since then. A lot of things have happened, and I'm certainly more than happy to think about that and commemorate that. However, let's start out the way we started 10 years ago, with bacon. Because what better way is there to start out a cast iron dish than with bacon? Now this again is the same the same skillet that was given to me 10 years ago, and boy, that skillet was in different condition. It was brand new; it had never been used. Had a golden or bronze color to it because it only had a very bare minimum amount of seasoning. And one thing I will have to say is that it took quite a long time. I better even turn this heat down. It took quite a long time to get some decent seasoning on this pan. That's because this is in fact a first generation of the Finex cast iron skillet. Finex only released this pan for the first time in early 2014, so it was brand new to everyone. Jeff, of course, had wasted no time in acquiring one of the first Finex skillets, and believe me, that's why, especially since it had only been several months since the company first started, that I was, again, absolutely astounded when he sent this pan to me. And because this is the first generation of the Finex skillet, this thing here had a glass smooth cooking surface, and in fact, I guess you could say it still does. I do admit it looks like some bits of this bacon seem to be sticking, but I think that might be I had this on, quite frankly, too high a heat, unfortunately, when I started cooking, and that was entirely my fault. Nonetheless, this wooden spatula here is still simply sliding across the surface of the cooking pan, which is one reason why this pan is such a joy to cook with. Though, as I mentioned, because this pan is so smooth, that was a big reason why it was so difficult to get some good seasoning on this. The very first time I cooked with this, I started burning off the original seasoning, and it took quite a few attempts at re-seasoning this pan myself before I was able to actually get the seasoning to adhere properly and get some decent seasoning on this pan to the point where it actually turned more of a darker color. I'd say it took at least two, maybe even 2.5 years of use, and even stripping and completely re-seasoning the pan before I was able to finally get this thing to season properly. However, I have since been able to do so. Oh yeah, all I did was turn the heat down just a very slight amount. Excuse me, I still have something in my throat. It only took a little bit. I only turned the heat down just a tad, And that's made a big change in how this bacon is cooking. It's not sizzling quite as much, and it's throwing off a lot less smoke, in fact. So I think I can even turn the heat back up to where it was. And it was only at medium on my gas range here. As I mentioned, this is the first generation of the Finex cast iron skillet, because I have since learned that Finex, quite frankly, redesigned this pan, in fact, especially to hold the seasoning better. And they're not the only company to do that. It seems that not only Finex, but other companies, of these newer cast iron companies, such as Field, Stargazer, and the like, they all initially started producing their pans with glass smooth surfaces, and everybody loved that, except for it was all the same problem. The seasoning would not stick to the pan, and that became such a serious problem for these companies that, again, they redesigned their pans slightly, so that the newer pans produced by Finex now do not exactly have a glass smooth surface. They in fact have a very, very fine texture to the surface. In that, if you look at it, it doesn't look like there's anything other than a smooth surface on the pan. But if you run your fingers over it, or if you run a cooking utensils like this, you will definitely feel that there are grooves in the pan, almost like invisible grooves that you might see on an old vinyl album. Which of course does help immensely in getting the seasoning to stick to the pan. That, of course, is one controversy that has existed among cast iron users pretty much since we started using these pans. Not just we, but our ancestors. And that is the question, of course, of smooth versus rough, one which I don't think will ever be finally resolved, because there is no simple answer to that, as well as everybody has their own preferences of how they like to cook in cast iron. The other thing about this pan is that it is extremely thick and heavy. This is definitely one of the heaviest cast iron skillets in my collection, especially considering its size. It is, in fact, it is a Finex number 12, and it is 12 inches in diameter from one tip of the pouring spout to another. This is 12 inches, but the flat parts here are not. I believe they're only like a little less, like maybe about 11 inches or so across. And Finex initially put these corners on the pan so that they could be used as pour spouts, so that you could pour grease from whatever you're cooking, like this bacon here, out of the pan without too much difficulty. Of course, on the other hand, it is, as I mentioned, very, very heavy, and it's, I shouldn't say it's difficult to lift, but it's not something that you can pick up like a lighter frying pan and just toss your food around. On the other hand, this pan has outstanding heat retention, and for that reason, I have since found that the Finex pan has been my go-to pan when I want to do things like sear a steak, for instance. A typical large cast iron skillet will sear just great when you make a steak, and there's no problem at all with making a steak in a large pan. I do feel this works maybe just a very slightly better, not much better, and the difference is barely noticeable, I would think. But nonetheless, I definitely would say that this pan, I've done my best to get a lot of use out of it, especially for things that require a lot of heat, such as, again, searing steaks. The other thing about this Finex pan, of course, is the spring handle here, which is not as successful a design as I believe it was intended. The idea of the spring handle is to reduce the amount of heat actually transferred from the pan, well, to the handle. And I'm sorry to say, it doesn't do that great a job. I mean, this part here is in fact cool enough. It's definitely cooler than here, but I can still feel the heat to the point where I have to use this glove here to hold the pan. Especially since the bronze tip here also definitely absorbs heat so that this part here gets blazing hot much faster than this coil spring does. This, however, has not stopped me from greatly enjoying this pan and using it pretty much whenever I can. All of which is why I considered it to be a special occasion that yesterday was actually the 10th anniversary of having this pan in my kitchen. But as for what I'm making, I'm also making the same dish that I made initially with this pan when I first made it, and that is simply a frittata. Nothing too difficult. Let's get out my slotted spatula here. That way there will be a lot of grease left over in this pan for us to go to the next step, which is to cook some potatoes. And again, those bits of bacon that were sticking are definitely not sticking now. However, I can see this grease here is starting to smoke, so we had better move on to the next step, and that would be the potatoes. This is 3 sliced potatoes. I sliced them thinly, but as you can see, there's plenty here. I mean, they do a good job of filling up this 11 to 12-inch skillet here. So, all told, this really is not too expensive a dish I'm cooking tonight. As I said, I've got 3 potatoes. That was maybe 4 ounces of bacon. These are white potatoes, for the record, so that if I were to make these with russet potatoes, they would, of course, just simply turn into mush, and I don't want that. While it would taste fine, I do want at least a little bit of bite to these potatoes. So instead, we are using white potatoes. So anyway, that's my story, and I am sticking to it. That, as I mentioned, I've actually had this Finex skillet in my kitchen now for 10 years. And that was, in fact, 2 different homes ago, 2 different kitchens ago. And I've done a fair amount of cooking in this all this time. Oh, one other thing that's happened in the past 10 years since this Finex skillet was introduced. Finex, of course, was actually bought out by none other than Lodge Cast Iron. So yes, Lodge, however, has allowed Finex to continue making their pans in almost exactly the same way, with the one sole exception that, as I said, the surface is no longer glass smooth, and in fact, it has that very, very fine textured surface to allow the seasoning to stick. And it's getting to the point where I can fairly easily cut these potatoes apart with this wooden spatula here. So I think we are about ready. Let's try this thicker one. We've gone this far. As I said, this was the hard part. Next up, onions. And of course, we simply have to cook these onions until they soften, or at least begin to soften. I also like that they're American, although I know Asian made can be good also. Yes, that is, of course, absolutely true. I mean, the problem with Asian cast iron is more political than actual physical problems. Asian cast iron is not contaminated with lead or made from depleted uranium or have coated with chemical poisons or anything like that. As I said, the problems we have with China are political, and I'm not going to get into politics here. I mean, yes, it's also true that foreign cast iron imports are a large part of the reason why all of the other cast iron manufacturers in the USA went out of business. That's part of the reason anyway. The other part is actually our own fault, in that they came up with non-stick frying pans, which took the country by storm, and pretty much forced cast iron into a niche market, where in fact it remains today. I would have to say the onions are already softening. That sure didn't take long. Means let's bring back the bacon. Probably wouldn't be a bad thing to throw in a little minced garlic. And with this, we're getting close. We also don't want this garlic to burn. And I still have the heat only on medium. Because frankly, with cast iron, that's about all you need. You don't need to crank the heat up to maximum, even when the recipe you are using tells you to. When they're talking about high heat, as you can see, this works just fine. A cast iron pan heated up at medium for several minutes before cooking. All right, now comes the mushrooms. Shrooms. Magic mushrooms. Some salt, pepper. Glad to say this is the same pepper grinder I had 10 years ago. Smoked paprika. Not too much. Probably enough. Should add some color as well as flavor. Now it's time for the binder. And 3 eggs. There we are. You throw in a bunch of cheese. Bacon, potatoes, mushrooms, eggs, and cheese. Truly, breakfast of champions, or in this case, breakfast for supper. I know that there's no such thing as too much cheese, right? However, I think that's plenty. Now at last, it is time to go into the oven. In we go. And to that, all we have to do is wait maybe a little bit more than 10 minutes. At which point, our frittata will be ready. We have a frittata baked in a Finex cast iron skillet, because this is the best way I can think of to celebrate the 10th anniversary of this Finex pan in my kitchen. And with that, I have been proud to celebrate the 10th anniversary of this Finex cast iron skillet.